He was just a boy, hungry, tired, and unnoticed by the world. On that night, he had barely enough food for himself, yet when he saw an elderly couple struggling, he did something unthinkable. With nothing to spare, he gave up his only meal. To most, it might have seemed like a small act of kindness, but in reality, it was a sacrifice that came from a place of struggle too deep to imagine. What he didn't know was that this single moment would set off a chain of events that no one, least of all him, could have predicted. The next morning, a knock on the door would change his life forever. But before that moment came, he would face the quiet cruelty of a society that often looks away when injustice stares us in the face. This isn't just about generosity. It's about how a child's heart, in the midst of hardship, revealed something powerful, something that would force the world to pay attention. Why would one meal matter so much? And how could a simple act of kindness uncover a truth that most try to ignore? Stay with me, because what happened next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice, humanity, and the price of compassion. It was a quiet evening in a small, worn-down neighborhood. The boy lived in a modest home with peeling paint and a roof that barely held back the rain. Life had never been easy for him. Most days, he carried the weight of hunger in his stomach and the silence of struggle in his heart. Yet, even in his hardships, there was something different about him, an innocence, a kindness that refused to fade. He wasn't the loudest child on the block, nor the one who demanded attention. Instead, he found joy in small things, helping his neighbors carry groceries, walking stray dogs to safety, or simply offering a smile when others looked away. But behind that smile was a story few cared to see, a boy navigating a world that often judged him by the color of his skin before it ever saw the purity of his heart. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the streets grew colder, he clutched a small paper bag with his dinner inside. It wasn't much, barely enough for one, but to him, it was everything. What he didn't know was that before the night was over, this simple meal would become more than food. It would become the turning point in a story far bigger than himself. The boy walked down the dimly lit street, clutching his paper bag tighter than ever. Hunger pressed against his stomach, but he kept moving, his small steps echoing in the quiet. Up ahead, he saw the elderly couple, frail, tired, and struggling with bags that seemed heavier than they were. Without hesitation, he reached into his own bag and offered them his meal. They hesitated, surprised that a boy with so little would give so much. But his gentle insistence left them no choice. What should have been a moment of quiet kindness did not go unnoticed. Across the street, a group of men watched. They didn't see generosity. They didn't see compassion. All they saw was a black boy, someone they had already decided didn't belong. Their eyes narrowed, and their whispers turned into cruel laughter. To them, his sacrifice wasn't noble, it was foolish, laughable, and above all, undeserving of respect. As the boy walked away, he could feel their stares burning into his back. He tried to ignore it, but the sound of footsteps followed. Louder, closer. His pace quickened. Theirs did too. By the time he reached the corner, the mocking voices had turned sharper. "Shouldn't you be begging for scraps instead?" one of them shouted. Another sneered, "What makes you think you're better than anyone else?" Fear tightened his chest, but he didn't respond. He had learned early that words could be dangerous. That silence was sometimes the only shield he had. Yet even silence wasn't enough tonight. A hand grabbed his shoulder, yanking him back. His bag slipped from his hands, spilling onto the pavement. The men circled him. They weren't interested in who he was or what he had done. To them, he was a target, a reminder of their own prejudice and cruelty. They laughed as they shoved him, their insults cutting deeper than their blows. "You think kindness will save you? You'll always be nothing." He stumbled, clutching the torn paper bag as if it could protect him. The world spun, his knees scraped against the concrete, and for a moment, he wondered if this was where his story would end, in the shadows of a street where no one cared enough to stop what was happening. But then, headlights cut through the darkness. A car slowed, and the men scattered like shadows fleeing the light. The boy remained on the ground, bruised, trembling, and clutching what was left of his meal bag. He wanted to believe the worst was over, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Because tomorrow, the world would knock on his door. And this time, there would be no place to hide. The next morning, the knock on the door was sharp, demanding, so unlike the gentle world the boy had tried to create for himself. He opened it cautiously, expecting perhaps a neighbor or the old couple he had helped the night before. Instead, standing before him were men in uniform. Their presence wasn't protective, it was intimidating. Their eyes didn't see a child, they saw a suspect. They asked questions he didn't understand. Their voices weren't curious, they were accusatory. Why was he outside so late? Who was he with? Did he steal that food? The boy froze, his small frame trembling under the weight of their suspicion. In their eyes, kindness had been twisted into guilt. Sacrifice had become a crime. Neighbors peeked through cracked blinds, whispering but staying silent. The boy's world shrank to the heavy boots at his doorstep, the piercing stares that seemed determined to crush him. He tried to speak, to explain, but his voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. One officer smirked. Another reached for his wrist, as if ready to drag him away. For a child who had already given so much, this was the cruelest punishment. Not hunger, not loneliness, but the crushing reality that his skin made him guilty before he ever had a chance to prove his innocence. Tears blurred his vision, his chest tightened, and for a moment he thought this was the end of his story, marked not by kindness, but by condemnation. And then, another knock echoed, louder, firmer. All eyes turned as a figure stepped forward from behind the officers. A man in a suit, confident, commanding, his presence impossible to ignore. His words cut through the air, "You're making a mistake." The boy blinked, his world spinning between despair and a sliver of hope. Who was this stranger? Why was he here? And how could his arrival change everything? The stranger's words carried weight, and for the first time that morning, the boy felt the tension shift. The officers, still rigid, hesitated. This man wasn't just anyone, he was someone powerful, someone they couldn't dismiss. With calm authority, he explained who the boy truly was, not a thief, not a threat, but a child who had shown more humanity in one night than many show in a lifetime. Slowly, reluctantly, the uniforms stepped back. The boy's wrist was released, his trembling body left standing in the doorway, free, but shaken. That moment became the turning point. The man in the suit wasn't just a passerby, he was a millionaire who had heard of the boy's sacrifice. He had come, not only to defend him, but to lift him from the shadows of neglect into the light of recognition. The boy, who had once given away his only meal, was now given opportunities that hunger and hardship had stolen from him. But even as his life changed, the scars of that morning remained. Because beneath the surface of one act of kindness and one miraculous rescue, there was still a painful truth. If not for chance, his story could have ended like so many others, forgotten, buried, dismissed. His innocence could have been erased by suspicion. His future destroyed before it ever began. This story is not just about a boy. It is about a world where compassion is questioned, where skin color becomes a verdict, and where too many acts of quiet injustice go unseen. The question isn't whether his life was saved, it's why it was ever in danger in the first place. So as you sit with this story, ask yourself, how many more children must face the weight of judgment before kindness is seen for what it truly is? How many more voices will be silenced before we choose to listen? His act of sacrifice changed his life. But will it change ours? That answer depends on us.